And now, ladies and gentlemen,
Put your thumbs up and say it's Tickety Boo.
Tickety Boo.
Tickety Boo, Tickety Boo, everything's Tickety Boo.
Tickety Boo, son. Tickety Boo.
Tickety Boo. So welcome back to another episode of Tickety Boo. Today we're talking about healing, and more specifically, why it can feel like you're losing yourself in the process. And honestly, it's one of those things that a lot of us don't really talk about. You hear people, don't you, say, I'm healing, like it's some kind of peaceful Zen experience. But let's be honest, half the time it feels like you're just falling apart in some form of slow motion. So we want to unpack why healing can feel so unsettling, why sometimes it makes you question everything that's going on around you and things you've done in your past about yourself, about experiences, about people, and why that's actually a good sign, even though in the moment it doesn't necessarily feel like it may be. Ian, can you remember a time where you felt like you were losing yourself because of this?
There will be specific times, but in truth it's probably a number of occasions that stem back to the same reason. Often it's when I either challenge myself or something challenges me, and I realise that all the stories that I've been telling myself, which is sort of who I am is built on, isn't true. Some of those building blocks aren't really what I thought they were. So often, like for example, sometimes if I've spent the last 10 years or a period of my life, just being angry or disillusioned by something, and then you feel you get the different perspective of it, and you realise actually that it was my own actions that led to that situation or enabled that situation or that person to do something. Then all of a sudden the narrative changes from they did that to me to I let that happen. And then it's what within me made that happen, and then I start to...
I think where I'd like to take this episode and this chat is the journey to healing. Because when I think of the word healing, I think, well, I've been through something and now I need to heal. But it's not always a case of that. It's like you reach this point or phase in life where maybe you're unhappy with the way you're living life, or you're unhappy with, your current experience, and you want things to change. And in order for things to change, we need to look at parts of ourselves and heal. Might sound strange, but sometimes we don't always recognise we need to heal before we start the journey, if that kind of makes sense to you. So normally, I know I realised I needed to heal when patterns in my life kept showing up, or there were dominant emotions that were hanging around in my life that just seemed to completely bamboozle me, and I wasn't able to move beyond them. And it was only when I really pressed the pause button to take a look at what was going on that I realised actually there was parts of me that needed to be worked on, and there was healing that needed to happen. So it's almost like when you're ready to learn the lesson, the teacher will come along.
But you need to be able to, you need to be at a point where you can acknowledge that. Definitely. The thing is, we've all been masking for so long. It's when we, for one reason or another, we remove that mask, and then we have to sort of look deeper into what's causing our behaviours, where that learned behaviour come from. And sometimes it's painful, it's not.
I suppose if you spent a large proportion of your life being like this, then changing's probably going to feel quite scary, because there's uncertainty there, isn't there? Like, okay, you're not happy where you're at, but you know what you've got. For actually healing, you're like, I get so many people say to me in the therapy room, I'm a bit afraid because I don't know what my life would be like without all this anxiety. Anxiety is familiar to me. I live with it every day, and I've learned how to cope and mould my life.
Well, exactly. Part of our, one of the addictions we've got in life is our need for certainty. And then all of a sudden that's totally removed when all these stories you've been telling yourself just aren't true, and you just start to see the life through. Well, you start to see everything through a different lens,
Yeah.
from a different perspective.
This sort of identity shift.
Yes, of course.
Because we do, don't we, need to, part of healing and why we're feeling like we're losing part of ourselves is that actually we need to divorce parts of ourselves.
You are losing parts of yourself.
Yeah.
You know, part of you will be dying and moving, and you're going to feel sad for that, because there'll be unhealthy coping mechanisms that you might enjoy that you realise aren't healthy.
Yeah.
There'll be relationships that aren't healthy. There's bits within yourself that, you know, that they might not be right, but they've been your go-to thought for such a long time. And now what do I do? Who am I?
Yeah.
And part of this evolution of letting go is sort of just decluttering.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's for me, it's like when I had to lose that part of me that felt like it always needed to be on guard, always be aware, I struggled letting go of that part of me until I actually realised it was a trauma response. It wasn't actually, this hypervigilance of aware of your surroundings and all the things that could go wrong. You think, well, that's positive. And you're like, no, you shouldn't be risk assessing every area of your life. It wasn't positive anxiety, as I refer to. It was me very much living in survival mode. And I struggled to move away from that, because that kind of went, well, am I sort of saying that I need to abandon my safety and my well-being? I struggled to believe that you should be able to live every day without worrying about everything. But a large part of my life was spent worrying about everything. So how do you leave that behind? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is difficult when that's been, such a core part of who you are. But that's a process. It's not who you are. That's just part of the process that you've built up of being you. And just letting go and just learning to...
Yeah, for me, I had to learn that process of letting go was not a linear process. It was like some days I felt like I was okay with it and other days I didn't. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, isn't it? They kind of go, oh, I'm doing therapy now, or I'm making changes, life's going to be amazing. And as we know, most people that come into therapy at Peace of Mind, what will happen is initially there'll either be resistance and they won't want to look at parts. And then when the resistance drops and we start to look at parts of them and patterns in their life, we're like, oh, this is making me really uncomfortable. I don't like looking at this. But then as we get deeper into the discomfort and they move in a new direction, start to divorce that identity to them, they can start to see how things can be. But it is this tug of war of the old you and the new you. And there is a lot of fear around letting go of that old version of you, because a part of you would go, well, I'm still alive, I'm still here.
Yeah.
I've got this far in life been like this, so there's no certainty that if I change, life is going to be any safer or better. So healing is actually harder than actually staying in where you're at, but it's not the right thing.
No, absolutely. Sort of understanding where these responses and thought patterns come from. Going back in time, revisiting those instances, those relationships, those communications that formed your current behaviours that don't necessarily... A lot of the time we don't actually realise how unhealthy they are. And people come to me to fix a problem.
Yeah.
But that problem is always a symptom of something that occurred much earlier. And, it's not the cause.
So do you feel like in some kind of way we have to grieve these past parts of ourselves and what we've been through and show them compassion?
Yes.
To move forwards?
Definitely.
Yeah, we talked about this in a previous episode, didn't we? The three parts of us are younger inner child that needed soothing, comfort and safety, the angry teenager, and the part of you that needs peace. Now, if you're going, I'm just going to get the part of me that wants peace and I'm going to sprint off into a happy future, but you leave these other two parts unhealed, you can't fully integrate yourself and move forwards. All parts need to be grieved, soothed, looked at, work done on them, so all the parts of you can come forward into your healing journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people feel like they're losing themselves, because the angry child was never heard.
Yes.
the younger
Definitely.
child was never comforted.
Yeah. Well, the child just never had one of its basic human needs met, which one of the examples that I've had recently, it's affection. And one of the sets of words that always sends me in that direction is when someone says, "My mum just wasn't the maternal type," and then you go down that, and then you find out that somebody never really had the love and attention they needed as a child, so they had to compete for it.
So
And that's
I can really relate to that because weirdly, at some kind of level, you're waiting for that person to come along and give you that so you can move forwards in your life. It's like I'm stuck until they do that for me, until they just see it from my perspective, until they see what I've been through, until they acknowledge that they didn't do this. I can't move forwards in life.
yeah, absolutely.
Stuck.
Yeah,
So it's almost like a catch-22. You want to move forwards, but you won't until this part of you's received something. But you've got no control over whether that's going to happen. That mother turns around and goes, "I'm really sorry I wasn't there when you needed to," and give you the hugs when you need it. But I'm here now. Havana, off I go into the future. But actually, I think what we're saying here is it's more about you can give yourself that compassion.
yes. That's it. You need to come to terms that you need to sort of, parent that inner child.
Yeah.
You know, you give that inner child the understanding and the love that it needed.
Yeah.
And that sort of perception of it, the adult's point of view.
Yeah.
As that adult now, you can go back and give that child the love. You can go back and give that child what it needs.
I think the hardest part, though, is as you do that work, as you have that realization and awareness, you have to redefine all of your relationships in your life with your family, with yourself, with your partners. Suddenly, everything around you looks different, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, that opens up a whole rabbit hole of emotion, because then you've got not only you're looking at your relationship with other people as you start to heal, your perception of the world heals.
Yeah.
Your perception of the world changes. So all of a sudden, you're not just questioning your relationship with yourself and how you're thinking, you're questioning the relationships that you have with those around you. You're sort of seeing their ulterior motives.
I think for me, the shock was that realization of how many unhealthy relationships there were around me.
Yes. And a lot of us become people pleasers, and we become the nice guy, and that's what happens. You attract people that, are more on the take.
Yeah. I think, we were very similar in our, although the delivery would have been different in our approach towards life, which was to appease and to people please. But actually then when you look at the dynamics in those relationships where people took advantage of your good nature, were manipulators, and actually it's that those relationships to us felt familiar. And when you start doing healing and looking at those relationships, you realise, oh my God, these either need to change or they need to go.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, hang on a minute, there's potentially some uncomfortable conversations to have here, or some things, some actions that I actually need to do here. Oh, hang on. No, let's go back to familiar.
Yeah.
It's really difficult at that moment when you go, oh my God, like everything. This is where a lot of people struggle. The situations, the spaces and the places that you find yourself in and the relationships you find you in, they're all on you.
Yeah, when you're getting very little in return.
But when you're not doing the healing, you're blaming the other people.
Yeah. Or you just feel you're fulfilling. You've got a purpose because you're doing things for other people without realising there is nothing in it for you. It is a one-sided relationship, and they're just taking advantage of your inability to say no.
Absolutely. So you feel like you're losing part of yourself, but that part of you was shaped by survival.
Yes.
And you're like, you're trapped in, I need to be the survivor.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, what's the Tom Hanks movie when he's on the beach? He's trapped on that island. and it's him and the ball. Is it Wilson?
Yeah.
Castaway or something.
Castaway,
Castaway. And, you see him adapt and he's living in survival on the island. But I always find the part when he gets back home, changing from the survivor to reintegrating into society and the struggles that happen with that. And that's where a lot of discomfort and, distraction from healing comes from, because moving from that survivor state, victim mentality, addicted to chaos, addicted to uncertainty, addicted to the high of the toxicity of the situation because it's familiar.
Yeah.
And so you stay in that space of attracting more of what's not good for you.
Yes.
We see people in the therapy room all the time that end up in really toxic dynamics in friendship groups, in interpersonal relationships with colleagues.
But again, like we keep saying, that's a trauma response. That's because you've never had what you needed at some point in your life. So what you do is you feel that for a relationship you need to work harder. If somebody's not coming back your way, you have to work harder, you have to put extra effort in. And that's how you and that's how your relationships just become one way, and you're enabling these behaviours, which is one of the parts of healing that is very painful. It's about learning to become accountable for your own parts, because what happens is, while we're in this victim mentality, we're hurt and we're never healing because it's always somebody else's fault. You can't change what somebody else has done, but you can change the way that you see it, how you were attached to that memory of it. Also, if you look more closely at it and somebody shines that spotlight on it, you have to acknowledge your part that you played in that, which is the acknowledgement. So accountability about something that's caused you so much hurt and admitting that you played part in that, that's uncomfortable. That's very uncomfortable, upsetting, and that can make you feel like...
So it's almost like pain becomes part of your identity. You're so used to experiencing pain that on an unconscious level you seek out situations that give you more because it's familiar.
Yeah.
And actually part of the healing is actually when you do find peace, it feels so uncomfortable, which might, some people listening to this episode were like, well, how can peace feel uncomfortable? But if you've never known it and you end there, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do here.
Well, you've gone in your head and you've just decluttered.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, for a while, as you're getting used to that quiet, which is what you've always wanted, and that calm, it feels like there's something missing.
Yeah, we call it trauma attachment. We hang on to all of the stuff in our life that knows that hurts us, and we continue to decide doing that because it's familiar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we see it in the therapy room all the time. They did this, they did that. If people just did this, if they weren't like this, they weren't like that. And that moment when you go, mate, you're the problem.
Yeah.
You're the consistent individual in every one of these situations. When I sit with a client and we work through their timeline of life, and at the end, and you say to them, the one thing that's consistent in all of the stuff that you've been through is you.
Mm-hmm. You say that. A client that I was with this week, we had a consistent a consistent pattern in everything that we've spoken about. Mm. And the pattern was, it wasn't her, it was the fact that if I asked her how she felt, it would be, well, all I thought about is, how would that make Dad feel? How would that make Mum feel? How would that... So she'd totally taken herself emotionally out of every situation. She couldn't even answer it. So I've now put her in a situation where I'm like, no, I've asked you all these questions, and the pattern is you've instantly diverted to, how would they feel about me acting this way in this situation? How am I making that person feel? So all of a sudden, for the first time, I'm making her acknowledge what she actually feels.
So she was taking responsibility for other people's emotions.
She was placing their own emotions so highly over her own.
Right.
She wasn't acknowledging and processing her own hurts, feelings, whatever. She would feel what somebody else told her to feel, or what she thought somebody else.
So a lot of her suffering was actually a resistance and fear of letting that go. That's where the suffering was at.
And Absolutely. But then at that point, as she opened up the void of leaving everybody else's emotions behind, she had to then process what her emotions were.
Yeah.
Which is actually a lot to take on in one book, you know.
Yeah, totally. And in order to let go of that and create space to make room for something better, that needs you to look straight in the eye of that uncomfortable emotion that you're trying to run away from, which is normally fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that part of letting go of who you are is an important process of letting you become who you authentically are, and even the person that you're meant to be.
So people really struggle with this idea, if you've never been in this, that actually you can become addicted to chaos and fear because it's all you've ever known.
Yes.
Like, a lot of people may struggle with the idea of peace feels not safe. I can look at parts of me during my growing up and friendship groups, relationship cycles, certain friendship dynamics that were really bad because some were bad people and they did bad things. Mm-hmm. Some were not bad people, but they weren't great people. But the one thing that was consistent around them was inconsistency. And what I mean by that was they were a bit chaotic, living life on the edge. Mm-hmm. There was always a sense of threat and uncertainty. But somehow you found yourself drawn to that because that felt familiar. But it was destructive, but wasn't able to step outside the pattern and see actually what was going on. Because you don't consciously decide to do this. It's like a magnet, you draw it.
But you know how to deal with those situations. At the time, with what you've got in your arsenal, you feel you know how to deal with that situation. And again, the people that are slightly on the edge, perceived as being a bit tough, and you see them as safety, you see that pack as safety, and we revert back to that need to fit in and be part of a pack.
So if you've only ever known survival, you're just going to continue to survive.
Yes.
Which means that you are going to audit your environment very differently to somebody who's not walking around every single day in life thinking about survival. Mm-hmm. So really, in some kind of ways, you're living your life in a state of fight or flight.
Yes.
And that feels comfortable to you. And, the central nervous system's so dysregulated that actually it's more uncomfortable to be in a state of peace and calm. So what a lot of people will do is they'll sabotage or blow up anything that's good for them. Mm-hmm. They'll wreck it and wreak havoc, or as I say, if you don't clean up your trauma, you'll bleed on others.
Yeah.
And you do damage to others, which I can completely relate with. By not owning your stuff and not leaning into healing, you hurt other people, you damage other people. And I can look at behaviors from my past and I can go, I'm owning up to them. I'm not trying to run away from them. But that need to be in survival and destruction led to shitty choices.
Yeah.
And it's also accepting going, there was a point in life prior to healing, which is, in my opinion, healing's an ongoing process, it's not a destination, is looking back and going, I don't actually like that version of me, who I was, who I became. Because if you don't look back and have the cojones, the balls to look at that version of me and go, I was an arsehole.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Yeah, I really don't like that version of me. I made bad choices, did bad things, because I was living in destruction and trauma. And when nice things happen, you wreck them.
Yeah, and in that way, there was a lot of relationships for good people that I didn't nurture because I leant towards the people that were bad for me.
Yeah,
because I wanted to be, part of that pack.
Be liked, be accepted.
It was like the perceived version. The outside, what the outside could see of me seemed to be more important than who I actually was. Mm-hmm. And those people that were genuine friends that would challenge that, I didn't give them the time that they deserved. And that was one of my biggest regrets. Mm-hmm. That sometimes there was things that I could have done, or people that I could have treated better.
Yeah,
that maybe I didn't.
So do you feel at that point in life you valued yourself much?
No.
Yeah, I'm with you on that,
That's-
definitely.
That's the problem. You know, you were relying on external validation because you couldn't validate yourself.
And I don't think you really think about your future at that point either, do you? You just are very much in that moment, day to day.
Yeah, well, you don't know who you are, so how do you know what you want?
Yeah, there's no future forward thinking, because a lot of people that don't heal and stay trapped can end up growing up quite old, miserable and lonely,
Yes.
because they've driven people away. I think a lot of people in these situations that don't go on to heal, a lot of them get classed, sometimes correctly but unnecessarily so, as narcissists. And yeah, you know, that's a whole different conversation, but there are people out there that are lost, are afraid to heal, and some of their behaviours and traits driven off the back of it come across as them being narcissistic. And yes, that can be the case, but it's not always the case, and they get branded as so. And now, don't get me wrong, that person needs to take a good look at themselves and some of the patterns, and they'll do that when they're ready. No one's going to force them to do that, but you can completely turn things around, and the destructive patterns, and peace isn't something to be feared. It's a natural state that humans go into when they remove all the clutter.
Yeah.
It's not a state that we create. It's actually when you stop all the negativity and the unhealthy coping mechanisms and being drawn towards the wrong things, you end up in a state of peace anyway. We default there. But as we've talked about before, we were talking about vulnerability. Mm-hmm. If you're going to lean into peace and it's something you've never known, you're going to feel really vulnerable in peace. It's not going to feel safe. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you're going, I would rather have the toxic because I know how to handle that. I know how to be reactive. Yeah, and it's, you know, you've talked about clients that you work with in the therapy room that go from situation to situation to situation, and they're almost photocopies of relationships, friendships, and they just can't see the destruction pattern.
Yeah. well, that's it. They can't see that the hurt that they're in is mirroring and attracting, which again, they don't quite see it as a trauma response, but effectively they are seeking out these people. These a lot. Often people do wind up with narcissists and people that aren't looking, aren't with you for the best intentions. But what it is that they seek out, you're giving off, which is often, you looking for attention, you competing for attention, you people pleasing, and a predator can see this. And they'll focus on it, or a narcissist will, and they'll bring you in because they know that they can manipulate you because of these traits from this sort of unhealed you.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to use the word trauma's a big word. Yeah. And we can, what one person sees as trauma, another person won't. But it is our life experiences that we've been through and our family dynamics that lead us into these places. What do you feel that your stuff that you went through took away from you?
Certainly my ability to communicate openly.
So I don't want to put words into your mouth. If I take that down another layer, would that be safety? I mean, how would you...
It was probably not wanting to be attacked, I suppose. Yeah, safety.
Yeah. So leaning. So by needing to be safe, in order to do so, you end up compromising yourself.
Yeah.
So you put yourself in unsafe situations to feel safe.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's a paradoxical effect, isn't it, of the very thing you're trying to do creates the very thing you're trying to get away from.
Yeah, exactly. So as much as I'm fighting to be, avoid conflict or, as you say, stay safe or keep people happy because I don't want to upset them, well then, like I was saying, then you attract the wrong people and then you put yourself in those situations.
Yeah. It's when I'm working with people in the therapy room and we're struggling to get to what the fear is, I always try and go with the 4 whys. Why did you do that? Well, because I just wanted to feel accepted. Why did you need to feel accepted? Well, so I felt like I was somebody of value. Why did you need to feel somebody of value? Well, because I need to feel that I'm lovable. Yeah. Why is feeling lovable so important to you? Because I'm afraid that. So, asking the whys, normally between 1 and 4 whys, will get you to the fear. And this is all driven by fear. Humans are totally driven by emotion. And the number one dominant emotion that holds you back in your life is fear.
Yeah.
Fear of change, fear of uncertainty, fear of the future.
Fear of not fitting in.
Yeah, fear of rejection, not being good enough.
Yeah.
All of those things. And I was talking about this to a client the other day. See all the range of emotions that we feel: happiness, anger, frustration, anxiety, overwhelm, and all of those things. At some point, somebody had to define them by putting a label on them.
Yeah.
But is the emotion really the problem, or is it the meaning we attach to the emotion that we're feeling and the story we tell ourselves off the back of it that's really the problem?
Yep. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So one of the things I did early on in my healing journey was start to become very aware of the stories that I was telling myself in my head. A lot of the times, give up, you're not good enough, they won't like you, why would you want to do this, da, 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 da. And all of those stories were driven by fear. Mm-hmm. And it's the one thing that constantly holds us back. So what I needed to do, and I think what a lot of our listeners will need to do, is redefine safety.
Yes.
What is safety? To me, at one point in my life, safety was avoiding anything that potentially created danger.
Yeah. I mean, for me, safety is probably putting yourself in a position where you can't be attacked, or if you are, you've got some kind of armour up to defend yourself, whatever that may be.
Yeah. So by living in survival, by constantly seeking safety, they are like a roadblock, a wall towards healing. That's where the resistance is at. Mm-hmm. And I think so many people go, well, when I feel more confident, when I have more space in my life, when I feel ready, I will start to make these changes. And I know for me, for a large proportion of my life, I was living in complete denial. Denial of what was going on, denial of what was making me happy, denial of all the emotions that were sitting under the surface, denial of what past versions of me have been through.
So that's numbing. So did you just numb yourself by just shutting everything down, or did you adopt unhealthy or different coping mechanisms? What is it you did to do? Because that's numbing. That is.
It is numbing. It was. Probably not having the right mindset and emotional maturity to actually process what I was experiencing, and it was much easier to lean into unhealthy coping mechanisms. Sometimes it was drinking it away, buying things, running away from it, suppressing the anxiety and just ignoring it was there.
Yeah.
All of those kind of things.
Well, yeah, that's a huge people. That's where a lot of drug addiction comes from, alcoholism, or just coming home and having a bottle of wine each night, eating. That's another one.
Food was yeah,
that's a huge one. Just keeping yourself too busy, because you don't. What you're trying to do is avoid the truth, your own truth, catching up with you, because you don't know what to do with it. You know it's there, and kind of as you slow down, as your mind becomes quiet, your anxiety and all the things that need healing start to creep in. So you try and make yourself busy to stop yourself processing.
Get busier. You mentioned food there, which is a really interesting one. The other day I was looking through some old photographs and I found some pictures of myself about 10 years ago. And I was like, oh my God, I was 4 stones heavier than I am right now. And I didn't really realise it, but food had always been a source of self-soothing for me. But actually, when I looked at it and I broke it down, that actually came from my childhood. So my mum is a trained chef. She's an amazing cook. And one of the ways that she would appease or make us feel better was through food. So from a very early age, I was unconsciously programmed that food was the source to deal with emotion.
Yeah.
And that just eat it away.
Yeah. But of course, it's not just eating, it's then other eating disorders that can also come from that,
Yeah. Food. Let's use food to control emotion. One of the best things we can do is allow ourselves to get comfortable sitting in discomfort. We put so much effort. I mean, don't get me wrong, the brain is hardwired to move away from discomfort, but actually get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's where change happens.
Yeah, that's where you process it.
Lean into discomfort. My anxiety only did one when I stopped fearing it. I always say to my clients in the therapy room, anxiety is like that bully in the playground, that if the bully knows you're afraid of them, they will bully you. But the moment you stand up to the bully, even though you're terrified, that bully thinks twice about taking you on. They'll look for the weaker target. And I spent so much of my life running away from the parts of me that needed to be looked at, running away from the discomfort. So I had to learn to sort of be comfortable with discomfort, but also grieving the parts of me that had been through some stuff and starting to have some compassion and understanding more about why am I the way that I am. When you can start to see the patterns and understand why you are the way you are, and you can understand it and rationalize it, it's a lot easier to deal with it. We talked in a previous episode about, well, it's just the way that I am. This is just what I do.
But it's all come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Like you said, it could be grief.
But it starts with you as the individual taking personal responsibility and going, I'm at threshold. I can't live with this anymore. This needs to change. Or you continue to allow it to run on in different areas of your life. And that's why healing feels like you're losing part of yourself, because it's like leaving a sibling behind.
Yeah. Somebody that you carried
Been
with you all your life.
Yeah.
That person. And you're leaving that part of you behind.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is there any particular processes that you've used to help you heal? Now, for me, forgiveness was one. And that was something that was very, very uncomfortable. And in my head, it was quite a big... So not only did I have to try and forgive other people for the perceived wrong that I thought they gave me. Part of that was becoming accountable. So I could forgive. Another part of that was because I was my own inner critic, and I was actually hurting myself by constantly hitting myself with a stick. I had to forgive myself for stuff that I might have felt shame for or whatever. So for me, forgiving myself and other people was an important part of me moving forward. Was there any sort of particular process that helped you with your healing?
I think there was a point I reached where I realised the biggest enemy of mine was between my two ears. And also recognising there was a lot of past versions of me that I really didn't like.
Yes.
And I spent a lot of time in sort of self-loathing, guilt, but not really realising that wasn't really helping me. So I had to learn to move on from the parts of me that I didn't like and understand to the best of my ability why I was the way that I was, and start to have a bit of compassion for myself, but also take responsibility. I think that's the key thing, start to take personal responsibility, because I needed to get back to who I truly was.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll be honest, I had no idea who I was.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful things I did, it was many years ago when I started my training, and I didn't even know this was going to happen, because if I've been honest, if I knew it was going to happen, I would have swerved it. But I'm glad it did happen. Was we were talking about emotions that keep turning up in our lives, and the person asked us to close our eyes and go quiet and think back to the earliest point in life where we could remember feeling that emotion. and it opened up a massive can of worms, as in realisation, what was going on, what had actually happened. Because I think a lot of this stuff, we kind of stick it in Tupperware tubs and shove it down in the basement, and we don't want to look at it. And I actually realised there was just somebody in there that needed a sense of security, lived in constant fear of abandonment. And when I saw that and I realised it, I could see all of the behaviours to avoid the fear that played out in all the other areas of my life. The frustration, if I'm being honest, is how how much of life has been lost to that.
Yes.
You know, there is I get this in the therapy room. A lot of people are like, I've wasted 40 or 50 years of my life to this. And I'm like, well, no, I wouldn't see it as wasted, because actually you've learnt a lot. It's just that you've not been at the point where you weren't ready for the lesson. You weren't ready to see it. Yeah. So, you know, nothing's a waste as long as you look back and you take the time. I mean, I would argue, I always say I'm a bit late to get it. But I would rather get it in my mid to late 40s than never get it at all, if that kind of makes sense. So resentment, I had to let go of resentment, guilt, and also take responsibility and start to have a bit of compassion for the parts of you that you didn't like in your past.
Yeah.
Does that mean today you're perfect? Christ, no. I don't know. You might think different, but...
Well, you're perfect or I'm perfect. I hate to say it, mate. I think we're still both a work in progress.
Yeah, and we remain that. And do these old patterns still show up in life? Of course they do. But you have awareness of them. You know, we're constantly healing wounds, altering behaviours. And I think it's really important that people listening to this episode of, if healing feels like losing yourself, what, instead of resisting it, you started to lean into it. Lean into discomfort. That is the path to healing and freedom. If you actually look back in your past, the resisting of discomfort is the very thing that's keeping you trapped in the things that are making you miserable.
Yeah, and what keeps you trapped in the same patterns. And which means nothing ever changes.
Yeah, and you know, we've been talking about feelings. If you don't deal with the fear, or whatever it is that you're experiencing, it will deal with you. Yeah. It will put you in a situation or situations in your life that you have no choice but to sit up and, you know, dictate who you are and where you are.
Yeah.
You know, one of the biggest things I would talk about in these episodes is personal responsibility. Own your stuff. It's not... I'm not saying it's your fault for what's happened to you, but it's your responsibility to fix it, and also not pass it on. If you're a parent, there's a very high likelihood that you're going to pass this on.
Well, of course. If you understand your hurt and you understand where it's come from, you break the cycle.
Yeah.
And that's something that's a positive. A lot of people struggle to pull a positive out of a hurt. There's always positive.
There's always a lesson.
Because you've learned there's a lesson.
Yeah.
But some people will struggle. But one of the biggest positives that, you know, often a parent or, you know, can give is what they've done is they've protected their children and the next generation from the hurt that they had, and that is always a positive, whether sometimes it could be sexual assault or whatever. But they see the signs, they understand. So what they've done is they've used that lesson to protect those that they care about.
Yeah.
So though it's difficult to pull a positive out of everything, they're always...
There's always a lesson. I say that to people, and I've said it 1,000 times in my life. For every negative in your life, every bad thing that happens to you, at some point in the future, there will be a positive that comes out of that. Whether that is a lesson learnt or whatever it is, there is always something in it. But I think for me, sort of learning to be comfortable was just about doing one small thing a day that felt like me, not like who I was supposed to be. So, or, you know, not be what people expected. That was what caused me a lot of problems in my life, being what I thought people expected me to be.
Yes.
Oh God, how to lose yourself.
But the trouble is, everybody expects something different from him.
Yeah.
According to their perspective on life, they've got a different idea, and
Yeah.
everybody else's, perception of you and their expectations.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, it's just impossible to achieve.
It is. So I think what we're really saying in this episode is healing is not about losing yourself. It's actually coming home to who you always were.
Yeah, and it's an accepting the fact that you will let parts of you go in order to declutter and let the new parts of you come in, or the more understanding, healed parts come in.
Yeah.
So as parts of us fade away, those new parts healed, those more evolved, it's just part of evolution.
Yeah.
You will feel discomfort as you go. It's kind of a growing pain, and it's accepting it and staying with the process, not abandoning your healing and going back to the familiarity of chaos and
Yeah.
hurtful circles or things that just don't work for you anymore.
I had to sit down, and it was a bit of an uncomfortable exercise. I sat down with a pen and a piece of paper, and I actually wrote down all the things in my life that were no longer serving me.
Mm-hmm.
I had to take a right good look at my life and create this list of all the stuff that was no longer serving me. There was some uncomfortable stuff in there. And it made me face some truths that were... I've probably spent way too much of life not wanting to accept. And it's scary. It's scary looking at those parts of you that need to be looked at and thinking about letting go of some stuff that feels familiar to you that you know is not right.
Yeah.
And that's what stops people from doing it. But at some point, you have to decide what fear you'd rather face. The fear of living the life that is full of fear, or facing the actual fears and living a life that there's no certainty about because it's not familiar to you. So there's fear, whichever way.
Of course there's fear, but you think it might feel at the time like you're losing yourself, but you're never entirely losing yourself.
Yeah.
You're losing parts of yourself. And like you say, that some of that's relationships, things that don't serve you. But never forget that you're still there, you're still effectively who you are. It's just parts of you that no longer serve you, or parts of you that need a little bit of work. Just have.
And do you think, as we sort of head towards the end of this episode, you should actually become excited that you're not actually lost, you're just becoming someone new. And that's the whole point.
Yeah. And part of that is becoming someone new. Who do you want to be? That's a choice you get to make as as you're evolving. You get to choose what direction you're evolving in, which is a positive one.
Funnily enough, when you start to let go of all the things that no longer serve you, figuring out who you are and who you should be tends to take care of itself.
Yeah.
Of
course,
you revert back to default type.
Yeah, it's people, thoughts, and whatever that are holding you back. And
yeah,
it's like a set of blinkers that have only got you focused in one small direction, and then once those blinkers are taken off and you can see everything, you can find your own direction.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah,
and you're not being steered blindly.
So I think if you're listening to this episode and you can really relate to it, I think start by looking at everything in your life that's no longer serving you, and look at the patterns in your life, and accept that this is going to be scary, but staying the same is also scary. And at some point, you just need to make the decision, I need to face this fear and step into the discomfort.
That's it. Give yourself some compassion and grace and patience.
And it's not a race.
No.
You step into it. It's a slow walk. It's not a race, because actually this process is going to be for the rest of your life. It's a journey that anybody that decides to do the inner work stays on until the day that you're no longer here. But you owe it to yourself and to those around you to do the work. So, just to cover off where we've really come from, healing isn't about losing yourself. It's about coming back home to yourself. But before you can do that, you've got to be willing to let go of everything that's no longer serving you in your life. Great chat. Yeah, good episode. Again, if you're watching, we really appreciate it. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple, please click the like, follow, subscribe button. If you're watching us on YouTube at the moment, please click the bell icon so you get notified when we release new episodes, and please drop comments. If any of this resonates with you, we always love to hear from you, and we can do future episodes on your comments, and you can stay incognito if you don't want us to reveal who you are. But again, thanks for watching, and we look forward to catching up with you in the next episode of Tickety Boo.
If you or someone close to you needs to access mental health support, please contact your GP, or if it's out with normal office hours, get in touch with NHS 24 on 111. Alternatively, contact the Samaritans on 116 123. All calls are free of charge from any phone. You can also find more support information on the Tickety Boo website, ticketyboopodcast.co.uk.